It begins with silence, a living, breathing silence that only the ocean knows. Down in the submarine, that silence has weight. It bends your thoughts, amplifies your heartbeat, and makes every breath feel borrowed. In 1942, the Atlantic wasn't just water. It was a battlefield, a graveyard, and a mirror to every soul who sailed upon it. I was part of the crew of U-156 under Captain Lieutenant Werner Hartenstein, one of Germany's best U-boat commanders. To most of the world, he was a hunter. To us, he was something harder to define, precise, distant, yet human beneath layers of duty. The weeks at sea bled together. Endless routines, stale air, and the mechanical rhythm of survival. The submarine groaned like a living beast, metal sweating condensation, narrow corridors forever stinking of oil and salt. We slept beside torpedoes, ate canned stew that tasted of iron, and dreamed of land we'd never see again. On one of those endless nights, the air was thick with tension. A sonar ping echoed through the hull, faint but sharp, a sound that made everyone look up instinctively. "Surface contact, bearing 207, the watch officer whispered. Hartenstein moved to the periscope, his expression unreadable. He adjusted the lens, then softly spoke. "British passenger ship, no escort." His next words came like a hammer. "Prepare tubes 1 and 2, we attack." No one hesitated. Orders were sacred. Within seconds, the men were at their stations, hands slick with sweat and lubricant. My world narrowed to switches, numbers, and the captain's calm voice. Depth 14 meters. Range 1,000 yards. Fire 1. I never got used to that moment. The quiet hiss of launch followed by a stretch of unbearable waiting. 20 seconds later, the sound came back to us through the steel. A deep, muffled roar that vibrated through bone and blood. The ship above, our invisible prey, had been hit. The periscope showed the target engulfed in fire. Crewmen around me whispered in awe. The SS Laconia. For a brief time, the crew was alive with grim satisfaction. Another victory for the Reich. Another tonnage counted for reports in Berlin. But joy dies fast underwater. Because the sea has a way of reminding you that victory always costs something unseen. Soon, faint cries began to seep through the air vents. Distant, unreal. At first I thought they were the creaking of metal, but they grew louder, clearer. Men yelling, women screaming. The ocean carried their voices down into our steel cocoon, and those sounds were impossible to ignore. At dawn, Hartenstein ordered us to rise to periscope depth. Through the lens, the Atlantic stretched in every direction. Scattered lifeboats, debris, people clinging to floating wood. Hundreds of them. He stared for a long time. Then he muttered something none of us expected from a German officer in wartime. "There are women and children, and Italians, our own allies." He stepped back from the periscope, face pale. "Surface the U-boat," he said quietly. The first officer hesitated. "Sir, the Admiralty forbids rescue." "I said surface." The submarine broke through the waves, metal hissing, pressure releasing. The hatch opened, and suddenly the world changed. Air cold, seas roaring with human noise. I climbed out alongside others, blinking in the pale light. All around us drifted people, soaked, wounded, desperate. "Throw lines!" shouted the captain. Ropes and rafts were tossed into the water. Some sailors jumped straight in to pull victims closer. We were trained to kill, but at that moment, our instincts turned upside down. Our hands, built for war, became tools for saving. The first body I pulled aboard was a young nurse, her uniform torn, skin ghost white from exposure. She whispered, "Thank you," in English, so faint I almost didn't hear it. Another man followed, an Italian prisoner of war who sobbed uncontrollably, calling on God and family. We didn't understand all his words, but we understood his gratitude. Soon the deck was packed with survivors, 200 of them, maybe more. No one knew the exact number. Women in soaked dresses, children crying, Allied sailors with bandaged heads. Every space on the narrow deck overflowed. Inside, we passed around blankets and rations. Someone handed out hot coffee meant for our watch shifts. Then came the sound that changed the mood again. A baby's cry. A British woman, trembling but alive, wrapped her arms around a newborn shivering from the cold. Even hardened crewmen turned away, pretending to check their equipment just to hide tears. Hartenstein stood on the tower, scanning the chaotic scene. Finally, he said, "We'll tow the remaining lifeboats. Get them tied to us." By nightfall, ropes stretched from the submarine to several boats bobbing behind like ghostly companions. Diesel fumes hung heavy above the dull roar of the engines as we moved slowly through the waves. Then Hartenstein said something that stunned us all. "Paint the red cross on the deck." The gunners fetched barrels of paint from lock storage. Under the captain's direction, they drew the massive symbol, bright red lines over gray steel. A German war machine transformed into a floating hospital. When the paint dried, Hartenstein ordered our radio operator to send an open transmission. To all ships, German submarine U-156, rescuing survivors of the Laconia. We will not attack if not attacked. Request assistance. The message went out in English, German, and Italian. Transparent, vulnerable, a plea in a world too used to deception. Later that night, I joined the captain on the deck. The sky above us stretched wide and merciless, stars glittering over the wreckage-studded sea. Some survivors slept huddled together. Others quietly spoke, their voices floating on the cold wind. "This is madness," I whispered. "If the Allies find us like this, we'll face whatever comes," Hartenstein answered simply. "But tonight, we are men first, soldiers second." In the reflection of moonlight, his face looked older, weary but resolute. 2 mornings passed like that. It was surreal, almost peaceful despite the danger. We lived between 2 nations, mercy and fear. Survivors and sailors shared cigarettes, whispered jokes, and even laughter. Someone played a harmonica. British sailors passed bread to Italian prisoners, who shared it with Germans. Enemies became humans again. One survivor, a British officer, shook my hand. "You saved my wife and child," he said. No war can make me forget that. His words burned into me deeper than any metal ever could. But not everyone trusted fate to keep mercy alive. On the radio, messages flickered between allies, coded, tense, skeptical. Some believed Hartenstein's broadcast was genuine. Others called it a trap. We tried not to think about it. The ocean was calm. The Red Cross glistened, and for a moment we allowed ourselves the lie that compassion could survive war. Until the planes came. The lookout spotted it first, a dark dot against the morning sky. Aircraft, bearing northeast. Within seconds, alarms blared. Men scrambled to stations, but Hartenstein raised his hand. "No weapons," he ordered. "They'll see we are a rescue crew." He climbed to the conning tower, coat whipping in the wind, watching the oncoming bomber. Through binoculars, we saw the white star on its wing, an American B-24 Liberator. "Signal them," he ordered. Our radio operator broadcast again in English. "Do not attack. We are rescuing survivors." Silence. The plane circled once, engines roaring. Survivors on lifeboats waved frantically. For a terrifying instant, it seemed the bomber would pass over. Then the bomb bay opened. The first detonation froze time, a thunderclap that shook heaven and sea alike. Water rose in columns around us, soaking the deck. Screams echoed across the waves. Another bomb hit near the lifeboats we were towing, hurling people into the air. Hartenstein yelled, "Dive! Dive!" The submarine groaned as ballast tanks filled. Survivors still clung to the hull, some sliding off as we submerged. Inside, red lights flashed, pipes rattled, and prayers filled the air. In the control room, Hartenstein's voice cracked for the first time. "They are bombing the very people we came to save." We sank deeper, 20 meters, 30, 40, engines silent, the ocean pressing in like a living weight. The crew sat motionless, eyes wide, as muffled explosions thundered above us. Hours later, when we finally surfaced, a terrible quiet blanketed the sea. The lifeboats were gone. The survivors, gone. Only floating debris and an oil slick marked the place where compassion had died. No one spoke. No one could. The Red Cross, once bright, was now burned and scarred, half washed away by the waves. Hartenstein stared into the horizon. "Signal no more," he whispered. In that moment, I understood something I never forgot. Mercy is always loudest, right before the world tries to silence it. The hours after the attack felt unreal. We drifted silently, engines off, men slumped against bulkheads like broken statues. Salt water dripped from every surface. The air stank of diesel and smoke. Even the usual noises, the hum of the motor, the rattle of the pipes, had faded into stillness. Hartenstein stood at the radio station, his face pale under the dim red lights. The operator looked up at him helplessly. "No response, sir. No signals." He didn't answer. He simply reached out, turned off the transmitter, and walked toward the conning tower. I followed a few steps behind. When he opened the hatch, the cold sea air rushed in, carrying the scent of oil and death. The ocean was calm again, deceptively gentle. Where hundreds of survivors had floated hours before, there was now only debris, broken rafts, burned timber, hats, shoes, bits of life scattered across eternity. Hartenstein removed his cap and whispered something in German I couldn't catch. Then louder, more to himself than to anyone else. "We tried." He looked older in that moment, his shoulders heavy with a weight that no uniform could hide. None of us knew what to say. Below deck, sailors sat quietly, some praying, others staring at the dented walls. One man muttered, "They killed their own." Another spat into his hands and rubbed his face in disbelief. For the first time in years, I saw the crew divided not by ideology, but by sorrow. We had tasted humanity for a brief, fragile time, and the war had punished us for it. The next morning brought orders from command to return to base. Our mission was over, though no one could call it a victory. The radio waves stayed silent. The sea felt endless. Every mile home was heavier than the last. When we finally reached port, news of what happened spread before we even docked. Our crew became a rumor wrapped in disbelief. A German U-boat rescuing enemies, a Red Cross painted on deck. Some officers greeted us with cold stares, others with guarded curiosity. Hartenstein filed his official report, brief, factual, stripped of all emotion. He didn't mention the crying women or the child we pulled from the waves. Only names, coordinates, tonnage, and the words, "Rescue efforts undertaken. Survivors attacked by aircraft." But among the ranks, whispers grew. Some said we dishonored the Navy. Others called it moral courage. Sailors argued behind closed doors whether we had done right or wrong. I'd never seen fear of conscience like that. Men terrified not of punishment, but of being reminded they still had hearts. Days later, we learned that our message, intercepted by the Allies, had indeed been deemed a trap. That single judgment had cost hundreds of lives. And then came the final insult, a new command from Admiral Karl Dönitz himself. It was blunt and ruthless. No more rescues of survivors under any circumstances. Every U-boat captain was to leave enemy sailors, soldiers, and civilians to their fate. No exceptions. The words felt like iron shackles around our souls. Mercy had officially become forbidden. Hartenstein called the crew together in the narrow control room. The air was tense, thick with fear and fatigue. He said, "You did what was right. Never doubt that. Orders change with governments, but right and wrong never do." No one answered. Some saluted, some turned away. But we all felt the same heavy truth. We'd glimpsed humanity, only to have it buried again under duty and steel. War forgets kindness quickly. The Atlantic swallowed the story before it ever reached the world's conscience. We were sent back out to sea, new coordinates, new missions, as if nothing had happened. The sea showed no mercy, but neither did command. Each time I looked through the periscope at another target, I wondered who was on the other side. What faces might stare into the dark when the torpedoes struck. I tried not to think of the nurse, or the child, or the sailor who'd said thank you as we pulled him from the water. But at night, their faces returned, floating in the blackness. In early 1943, word came that U-156 had vanished near the Caribbean. Depth charges from an American patrol aircraft had ended her voyage. There were no survivors. The name Hartenstein vanished into naval logs, just another casualty among thousands. To most, that was the end. To me, it was unfinished, a story too heavy for silence. When the war ended and Germany lay in ruins, I carried Hartenstein's memory like a secret flame. People only wanted to talk about battles, not mercy. But I knew that for a few days in 1942, mercy had lived, bright and defiant in the middle of madness. Decades passed. The ocean became quiet again, as if nothing had ever happened. But sometimes, when I walked along the shore, I'd hear echoes carried by the wind, a faint splash, the cry of gulls, the sound of an engine fading away into the horizon. Historians began to uncover the truth bit by bit. They called it the Laconia Incident, a dry name for something so human, so painful. Documentaries, books, reports. But none of them captured what it felt like to stand on that deck, surrounded by the people you were supposed to hate, seeing in them your own reflection. They didn't talk about the way the sea glowed under the moon that night, or how our Red Cross paint shimmered over rust and salt, or how laughter had briefly returned to a place built for death. I sometimes visit memorials where U-boat artifacts are displayed. Rusted periscopes, fragments of sonar dials, old uniforms sealed behind glass. People whisper around them, calling us monsters. I don't correct them. Maybe we were. But Hartenstein wasn't. Not that week. When I see his photograph, sharp jaw, owl-like eyes, I remember the man who looked at an enemy's suffering and said, "Surface." That single word changed everything. War teaches you to obey, not to think, to destroy, not to feel. But that night in September 1942, on a sea filled with flames and drowning voices, one man remembered what it means to be human. I still remember the warmth of the survivors' hands as we pulled them aboard, their trembling gratitude. I remember the smell of damp wool and salt, the murmur of prayers spoken in English and Italian, the strange silence that followed each cry for help. If you ask me what courage is, it's not killing without hesitation. It's defying everything you've been taught for the sake of compassion. That's what Hartenstein did. He knew he might die for it. And eventually, he did. But between the torpedoes and the depths, between ideology and humanity, he found something rare: conscience. The sea holds his monument now. No stone, no flag, just water whispering to itself. Sometimes when storms rise over the Atlantic, I swear I can still see it. A phantom submarine gliding through the waves, a faded red cross on her deck, lifeboats trailing behind like memories refusing to sink. They call it history. I call it proof. Proof that even at the lowest depths, mercy can surface. In a war ruled by orders, one man broke the rules to save lives. He chose kindness over hatred, conscience over command. His name was Werner Hartenstein, captain of U-156. And though the sea claimed him, his story survived, not as a tale of defeat, but as a reminder that even in humanity's darkest hour, there are lights that refuse to fade.